Technology Risk Solutions welcomes all Nkwe Platinum Mines Management. Today, October 26, 2021. Management Awareness, Legal Liability Training. Fatalities to date. Fatalities per commodity. Fatalities by classification. Fatalities per region. And monthly fatalities per commodity for 2021. Injuries to date. Injuries per commodity. Injuries by classification. And injuries per region. Fines and penalties as per Section 92. Any person convicted of an offense may be sentenced to a fine, or to imprisonment to be determined by the court. Maximum fines or period of imprisonment that can be imposed for offenses as shown below. Fines and penalties as per Section 92. Fines and penalties as per Section 92. Index 1. Introduction. The intent of this session is to provide site managers and supervisors with information regarding their legal duties and responsibilities, and to provide awareness of the duties and responsibilities that they accept when signing legal appointment documentation. 2. Liability. 3. Mine Health and Safety Act, Act 29 of 1996. 4. Content of site manager's legal appointment. 5. Introduction of your Appointment Minerals Act Regulation 2.9.2. 6. Appointment letter. 7. The duration of your appointment. 8. Statutory report line and functional report line. 9. Scope of appointment. 10. Responsibilities. And 11. Regulations in terms of Mine Health and Safety Act, Act 29 of 1996. Introduction. The intent of this session is to provide site managers and supervisors with information regarding their legal duties and responsibilities, and to provide awareness of the duties and responsibilities that they accept when signing legal appointment documentation. During this session, the following will be discussed. Legal liability. The reasonable man test. The Mine Health and Safety Act. Employers' duties for health and safety. Employees' duties for health and safety. Right of refusal. Exit medicals. Content of the site manager and supervisor appointment letters, and clarification of the duties and responsibilities of the site manager and supervisor, as described in appointment letters. Inspector's powers. 1. An inspector may, for the purposes of monitoring or enforcing compliance with this Act, a. Enter any mine at any time, without warrant or notice. b. Enter any other place after obtaining the necessary warrant, in terms of subsection 7, and c. Bring into and use at any mine, or at any place referred to in paragraph d. Vehicles, equipment, and material, as necessary to perform any function in terms of this Act. 2. While the inspector is at any mine or place, referred to in subsection 1, the inspector may, for the purposes of monitoring or enforcing compliance with this Act. Inspector's powers. 3. An inspector may instruct any employer, employee, or any other person who performs an activity regulated by this Act, or any former employer or employee or person who formerly performed an activity regulated by this Act, to appear before the inspector, to be questioned on any matter to which this Act relates. 4. Before an inspector may seize any document under subsection 2g, the employer of the mine may copy it. 5. An inspector may remove any article, substance, or machinery, or any part or sample of it, from any mine or place referred to in subsection 1, for examination or analysis. 6. When an inspector seizes or removes any item under this section, the inspector must issue a receipt for that item, to the employer of the mine or place involved. Inspector's powers. 7. A magistrate may issue a warrant, contemplated in subsection 1b, only on written application by an inspector setting out under oath, or affirmation the need to enter a place other than a mine, to monitor or enforce compliance with this Act. 8. For the purpose of this section, mine does not include any home, or residential quarters, situated at the mine. 9. Note, please ensure that you have the latest and updated copy of the Mines Health and Safety Act available. Rights to prospect and mine for, and to dispose of minerals. Owner. In relation to a mine means the holder of a prospecting permit or mining authorization, issued under the Mineral and Petroleum Resources Development Act, substituted by Section 30F, of Act 74 of 2008. If a prospecting permit or mining authorization does not exist, the person for whom the activities contemplated in paragraph B, of the definition of mine are undertaken, but excluding an independent contractor, or, if neither one or two is applicable, the last person who worked the mine, or that person's successor in title, and in relation to a works, means the person who is undertaking the activities, contemplated in the definition of works, but excluding an independent contractor. Rights to prospect and mine for, and to dispose of minerals. 1. Prospecting means, intentionally searching for any mineral by means that disturb any tailings, or the surface of the earth, including the portion of the earth that is under the sea or under other water, by means of excavation or drilling, but does not include mine as a verb. 2. No holder of any prospecting permit shall remove any mineral found by him the holder in, or on land, or in tailings in the course of prospecting operations, from such land or the land on which such tailings are situated, or dispose of any such mineral, excluding samples of any such mineral removed for tests thereon, or identification, or analysis thereof, except with the written consent of the holder of the right to such mineral, in respect of such land or tailings, and with written permission granted by the regional director or director, mineral development concerned, subject to such conditions in respect of safety and health, optimal utilization or rehabilitation as may be determined by him, and specified therein. Restriction on issuing of prospecting permit. 1. Restriction on issuing of more than one prospecting permit, or mining authorization in respect of same mineral and land. 2. No prospecting permit or mining authorization shall be issued, in respect of any mineral in respect of land or tailings, as the case may be, if a prospecting permit or mining authorization has already been issued, in respect of such mineral and land or tailings, as the case may be, unless the regional director or director of the mineral development is satisfied, that such first mentioned issuing will not detrimentally affect the object of this act, in relation to optimal exploitation of minerals, safety, health, or rehabilitation. Rehabilitation substitutes the long title of the Minerals Act 50 of 1991. The following long title is hereby substituted, for the long title of the Principal Act. 1. To regulate the prospecting for, and the optimal exploitation. 2. Processing and utilization of minerals, to provide for the safety and health of persons, concerned in mines and works. 3. To regulate the orderly utilization, and the rehabilitation of the surface of land, during, and after prospecting and mining operations, and to provide for matters connected therewith. Updating of surface plans. 1. 17.31, the employer must take reasonable measures to ensure, where rehabilitation is completed after cessation of mining, that the surface and rehabilitation plans contemplated in Regulation 1717, or 24, and 29B are updated upon such completion. Rehabilitation. 1. Paragraph B, amended by Government Gazette GNR 94 of 1997. Alter, remove, or in any way interfere with or render ineffective, or disregard any measure relating to rehabilitation, or to the management of the environment at a mine, unless duly authorized thereto in writing, by the holder of the prospecting permit or mining authorization, or the owner or manager of that mine, provided that in the case of a mine which is closed down, such authorization shall be obtained in writing from the Principal Inspector of Mines. 2. Regulation 5.12.4 inserted by GNR 537 of March 21, 1980, and deleted by GNR 367 of 27 February 1987, when the rehabilitation of the surface of a mine, or any portion of a mine has been done to the satisfaction of the Director of Mineral Development, he may, in consultation with the Director General of the Department of Water Affairs, issue a certificate to the manager, to the effect that the provisions of these regulations, insofar as the rehabilitation of the surface is concerned, have been complied with. Liability. All citizens of South Africa, we are legally compelled to adhere to South African legislation that governs us as a nation. In terms of this, we become liable to ensure compliance with specific provisions of legislation applicable to us as citizens, employers, and employees. As such, this liability can be classified as follows. General legal liability. Not all offenses are addressed by legislation. In some instances, a person may face liability in terms of common law, and for this reason, both employers and employees should have a basic understanding of common law concepts. The following concepts are those to which an employer and employee may face on a daily basis. Criminal liability. A person will face criminal liability when a statute or common law duty has been contravened, and in terms of this, the person would be prosecuted and the case heard in a courtroom. The person would then become the accused, and if convicted, could be sentenced to a fine or imprisonment or both. The most important elements of criminal liability are: it is always the state versus a person, or company. Many companies are juristic persons that will be typically represented by the CEO. The trial aims to determine whether the accused is guilty of the charges against him. The purpose of the trial is to punish the guilty person. Criminal liability comes from two sources: legislation, statutes; common law, murder or homicide. Liability. Civil liability. In the event that a person's negligence causes loss or injury to another person, third party, the person that was injured or incurred loss, could sue for compensation in a civil court. The third party then becomes the plaintiff, and the negligent person becomes the defendant. Having heard the case, the court may order that the defendant compensate the plaintiff. This is the basis of civil liability, and there are no fines or imprisonment involved. In such cases, the state is also not generally involved. The important elements of civil liability are: it is always one private person versus another. The trial aims to determine whether the defendant is liable for negligence. The purpose of the trial is to compensate the plaintiff. Civil liability has basically one source, which is common law. There are different types of common law liability. However, the most important element is delict, for example, where one person causes harm to or damage to another. Vicarious liability. This is an important concept which the site manager and supervisor must be aware of. This principle is also known as the master-servant principle. This principle is based on the following. The site manager or supervisor would have people under his control. The site manager or supervisor must exercise that power of control, to ensure that his subordinates act as reasonable people. In the event that a subordinate commits a wrongdoing, it is because the site manager or supervisor failed to exercise his control, as a reasonable site manager or supervisor would. This failure of exercising control is as serious as a wrongdoing that is committed by the subordinate, and on this basis, the site manager or supervisor would be punished by being held responsible for the subordinate's wrongdoing. Vicarious liability applies to both civil and criminal law aspects. Thus, if an employee violates any provision of a statute, or commits a criminal common law offense, the site manager or supervisor could be held liable, and/or if a third party suffered any loss or damage due to the employee's negligence, he could lodge a civil claim against the site manager or supervisor. Generally, the principle of vicarious liability, as indicated above, would not apply in a statute, unless the statute specifically provides that it shall apply, as is the case with the Occupational Health and Safety Act, Act 85 of 1993. Burden of proof. In a criminal case, the state must prove beyond reasonable doubt that the accused is guilty of an offense. This is a reasonably difficult matter due to the potential of severe consequences that may follow, should the accused be found guilty. In a civil case, the plaintiff must prove his case on a balance of probabilities. For example, he must show that his version of the matter is more believable than the defendant's. This test is not as strict as in a criminal case. The reasonable man test. The Mines Health and Safety Act refers in some instances to reasonably practicable. This, in essence, refers to the extent to which a reasonable man would be able to foresee that an act or omission could result in harm, as well as the extent of reasonable action that he would take in the prevention thereof. In addition, it examines the behavior of a person, in terms of deviation from what a reasonable man would display. Reasonably practicable means practicable having regard to a. The severity and scope of the hazard or risk concerned. b. The state of knowledge reasonably available concerning the hazard or risk, and of any means of removing that hazard of risk. c. The availability and suitability of means to remove or mitigate that hazard or risk, and d. The cost of removing or mitigating that hazard or risk, in relation to the benefits deriving therefrom. Objectives of the Mine Health and Safety Act, Act 29 of 1996. As we have said, we have a legal obligation to comply with the legislation of the country. In the mining industry, we are regulated by the Mine Health and Safety Act, which will be discussed in the following slides. The Mine Health and Safety Act, Act 29 of 1996 was promulgated on May 30, 1996. The Act was drafted by a committee comprising of representatives from government, employers, and employees with the intent of improving and protecting the health and safety of employees, while they are at work, as well as persons who are not employees that may be directly affected by the activities at the mine. The purpose of the Act is to provide for protection of the health and safety of employees and other persons at mines and, for that purpose, to promote a culture of health and safety, to provide for the enforcement of health and safety measures, to provide for appropriate systems of employee, employer, and state participation in health and safety matters, to establish representative tripartite institutions to review legislation, promote health, and enhance properly targeted research, to provide for effective monitoring systems and inspections, investigations, and inquiries to improve health and safety, to promote training and human resources development, to regulate employers' and employees' duties to identify hazards and eliminate, control and minimize the risk to health and safety, to entrench the right to refuse to work in dangerous conditions, and to give effect to the public international law obligations of the Republic, relating to mining health and safety, and to provide for matters connected therewith. The promulgation of the Mine Health and Safety Act resulted in the Minerals Act, Act 50 of 1991 being repealed. However, the Minerals Act regulations remain in force and effect in terms of Schedule 4 of the Mine Health and Safety Act, until they are officially repealed by notice in the Government Gazette. Mine Health and Safety Act, Act 29 of 1996. From the previous slide, Nkwe Platinum has implemented the following, in order to ensure that the intent and purpose of the Mine Health and Safety Act provisions, and the provisions of other legislation applicable to Nkwe Platinum. Nkwe Platinum has an established integrated safety management system, that conforms to the Occupational Health and Safety Assessment Series 18001 of 2007 and ISO 14001 of 2004 international standards. As contemplated in Section 11 of the Mine Health and Safety Act, Nkwe Platinum has compiled and maintains its baseline risk assessment, issue-based risk assessments and continuous risk assessment processes. To provide for the enforcement of the legislative provisions, Nkwe Platinum has employed and appointed persons in various positions and levels of management, to ensure that the provisions of the legislation, code of practices, standards, procedures, rules, and instructions issued by any person with the authority to issue such instructions, are complied with. The mining industry has established the Health and Safety Council and Safety in Mines Research Advisory Committee in order to provide a platform for engagement by state, employer and employee representatives to review legislation, promote health, and enhance properly targeted research. Nkwe Platinum has established training programs to develop and educate employees, as required by Section 10 of the Mine Health and Safety Act. Nkwe Platinum enforces the right of workers to refusal, with regard to the performance of unsafe work, or unsafe working practices, as contemplated in Section 23 of the Mine Health and Safety Act. In terms of the above, you will be exposed to the following on a continuous basis: mass safety meetings, mid-shift safety meetings, planned inspections, visible felt leadership, planned task observations, risk assessment, baseline, issue-based and continuous or mini HIRA, training and licensing requirements. Employers' duties for health and safety. In terms of Section 2.1 of the Mines Health and Safety Act, the employer must ensure safety. It states: employer to ensure safety. 1. The employer of every mine that is being worked must a. Ensure, as far as reasonably practicable, that the mine is designed, constructed, and equipped to provide conditions for safe operation and a healthy working environment, and with a communication system and with electrical, mechanical, and other equipment as necessary to achieve those conditions. B. Ensure, as far as reasonably practicable, that the mine is commissioned, operated, maintained, and decommissioned in such a way that employees can perform their work, without endangering the health and safety of themselves, or of any other person. In addition, the Act provides for the employer to appoint a manager as contemplated in Section 3 and, in compliance with this requirement, the BU manager is appointed in terms of Section 3, 1a, read with Section 7.2, of the Mines Health and Safety Act. By virtue of his appointment, the manager may appoint any person with the qualifications, as may be prescribed to perform any function of the manager. Thus, in terms of this provision of the Act, and because it is impractical for the manager to attempt to manage every aspect of the operation, he has the authority to appoint persons with the appropriate qualifications, knowledge, and skills to assist him in the day-to-day running of the mine, and, for this reason, the requirement for subordinate managers on various levels exists. In terms of site manager and site supervisor appointments, they are made in terms of Section 7.4, read with Minerals Act Regulation 2.6.1 and Section 7.4, read with Minerals Act Regulation 2.9.2. In terms of the Mines Health and Safety Act, there are specific duties for employers, employees, and suppliers. We will, for the purpose of this session, list only the employer and employee duties. Employer's duties for health and safety. The employer must ensure a healthy and safe mine environment, Section 5. Ensure an adequate supply of health and safety equipment, Section 6. Staff the mine with due regard to health and safety, Section 7. Establish a health and safety policy. Prepare and implement codes of practice, Section 9. Provide health and safety training, Section 10. Assess and respond to risk, Section 11. Conduct occupational hygiene measurements, Section 12. Establish a system of medical surveillance and record such surveillance, Section 13, and, Section 15. Record hazardous work, Section 14. Compile an annual medical report and submit it to the DMR, Section 16. Conduct exit medical examinations and provide certificates, Section 17. Carry the cost of examinations, Section 18, and provide relevant information to employees, Section 19. Note, in terms of Section 24 of the Mines Health and Safety Act, the employer may not compel an employee to pay, nor make any deduction from the salary of that employee, for safety equipment that the employer is required to provide, in the interest of the health and safety of the employee. Employees' duties for health and safety. In terms of Section 22 of the Mines Health and Safety Act, every employee at a mine, while at that mine must take reasonable care to protect their own health and safety. Take reasonable care to protect the health and safety of other persons, who may be affected by any act or omission of that employee. Use and take proper care of protective clothing and other health and safety facilities, and equipment provided for the protection, health, or safety of that employee and other employees. Report promptly to their immediate supervisor any situation which the employee believes presents a risk to health or safety of that employee, or any other person, and with which the employee cannot properly deal. Cooperate with any person, to permit compliance with the duties and responsibilities placed on that person, in terms of the Act, and comply with prescribed health and safety measures. In terms of the above, one can see that, as described in the introduction, we have a duty to comply with the provisions of legislation as well as our own codes of practices, standards, procedures, rules, and instructions. It must be noted that these provisions may be amended from time to time, and it is the site manager and site supervisor's duty to remain current with regard to these provisions. Right of refusal. In terms of Section 23 of the Mines Health and Safety Act, the employee has the right to leave any working place whenever circumstances arise at that working place which, with reasonable justification, appear to pose a serious danger to the health or safety of that employee, or the health and safety representative responsible for that working place directs that employee to leave that working place. It must also be noted that the employee has a duty to assist in making the workplace safe, so that work can continue.
Section 22. Employees' duties for health and safety. Every employee at a mine, while at that mine, must A. Take reasonable care to protect their own health and safety. B. Take reasonable care to protect the health and safety of other persons who may be affected by any act or omission of that employee. C. Use and take proper care of protective clothing and other health and safety facilities and equipment provided for the protection, health, or safety of that employee and other employees. D. Report promptly to their immediate supervisor any situation which the employee believes presents a risk to the health and safety of that employee or any other person, and with which the employee cannot properly deal. E. Cooperate with any person to permit compliance with the duties and responsibilities placed on that person in terms of this Act. And F. Comply with prescribed health and safety measures.
Exit medical examinations. In terms of Section 17 of the Mine Health and Safety Act, every employee at a mine must, if the employee was subject to, or was required to be subject to, medical surveillance in terms of the Act and such employee's employment at the mine is terminated for any reason, the employer must arrange an exit medical examination of the employee. This exit medical examination must be held within 30 days of the termination of employment. The employee must attend the examination. No exit in absentia will be performed unless the employer can provide traceable evidence that every effort was made to ensure that the employee was in attendance. The occupational medical practitioner will produce an exit certificate, and also retain a copy thereof in the employee's record of medical surveillance. Having provided the background information regarding the need for legal compliance, liability, the Reasonable Man Test and the Mine Health and Safety Act, we will examine the appointments of the site manager and site supervisor. During this examination of the content, it is intended that the magnitude of your role, responsibility, authority, and accountability with regard to the position of site manager or site supervisor, that you have been entrusted with, and that it will empower you to ensure compliance with all of the requirements placed upon you and your staff. Content of Site Manager and Supervisor Legal Appointment. Introduction. Introduction of your appointment. Your appointment as Site Manager is on the following terms. In terms of Section 7.4 of the Mine Health and Safety Act, Act 29 of 1996, Mine Health and Safety Act, read with Minerals Act, Regulation 2.6.1 which remain in force and effect in terms of Schedule 4 of the Mine Health and Safety Act, you are appointed as Site Manager at Nkwe Platinum. Your appointment as Site Supervisor is on the following terms. In terms of Section 7.4 of the Mine Health and Safety Act, Act 29 of 1996, Mine Health and Safety Act, read with Minerals Act, Regulation 2.9.2 which remain in force and effect in terms of Schedule 4 of the Mine Health and Safety Act, you are appointed as Site Supervisor at Nkwe Platinum. Content of Site Manager and Supervisor Legal Appointment. Appointment Letter, in terms of Mines Health and Safety Act Regulation 2.6.1. Appointment Letter, in terms of Mines Health and Safety Act Regulation 2.6.1 and 2.9.2. Do you have a start and an end date on your appointment letter? Name the acts your appointment as Site Manager or Site Supervisor is based on. Briefly explain what you understand under geographic scope. Briefly explain what you understand under the word superseded. Briefly explain the difference between the following report lines. A. Statutory report line. B. Functional report line. Content of Site Manager and Supervisor Legal Appointment. Duration. The duration of your appointment. The duration of your appointment means from date you sign your appointment letter, until superseded or cancelled by mine, your appointment letter will have a start date and an end date. Superseded. To replace someone, take the place of a person previously in authority, or when the end date on your appointment letter expired. Note: you as Site Manager or Supervisor will be on standby and must be available at all times. That includes after hours and weekends. When on leave you must ensure that there is a substitute relieving in your position and appointed for that period. That's your responsibility. Not complying with the Mine Health and Safety Act, Act 29 of 1996 or Nkwe Code of Practices Standards and Procedure, you can be replaced, superseded, from your position. Content of Site Manager and Supervisor Legal Appointment. Scope of Appointment. Scope of Appointments. The geographic scope and functional area of responsibility of your appointment. The geographic scope is the coverage that you have within an area, and service that you will provide under the conditions of Nkwe Platinum, to a certain contract owner who you will be assigned to, under certain rules and regulations. When your area of responsibility changes, your contract owner will change as well. Content of Legal Appointment. Responsibilities. Responsibilities. Enforce compliance to the requirements of the safety management system in his or her area of responsibility. Ensure his or her subordinates are trained in the requirements relevant to each employee. Monitor and measure inspections, PTOs, mini-HIRA, and VFLs, the effectiveness and practically of control measure, and make recommendations where necessary to improve the system. Take action, coaching, training, discipline, for non-compliance. Generate job cards for the corrective actions when required. Upon receiving the records, capture the data in the system. Implement and maintain a filing system for all the hard copies of safety records. Take minutes at safety management system review meetings. Coordinate external audits. Implement corrective measures identified from the review process, to ensure continuous improvement in your area of responsibility. Responsibilities, summary of Section 22, of the Mine Health and Safety Act. Each employee must use and take proper care of protective clothing, personal protective equipment, and other health and safety facilities, and equipment provided for protection, health, or safety of that employee and other employees. The Code of Practice must set out how the significant risks in relation to personal protective equipment for women in mining are identified and assessed, in terms of the risk assessment process, referred to in paragraph 7.1 above, will be addressed. The Code of Practice must cover at least the aspects set out below unless there is no significant risk associated with that aspect at the mine. Responsibilities of a site manager and/or supervisor. Plan, organize, lead and control. What is a supervisor? A supervisor is responsible for the day-to-day performance of a small group. It may be a team, or a shift. The supervisor has experience in what the group does, but is not necessarily better at it than everyone he or she supervises. The supervisor's job is to guide the group toward its goals, see that all members of the team are productive, and resolve problems as they arise. Supervisor roles and responsibilities. P equals safety planning. L equals safety leadership. O equals organizing and individual behavior. C equals control, management of change. Management functions. For optimum performance to attain our goals, products, services, and efficiency. We can implement the P for planning, where we identify and set goals and ways to attain them. O organizing. Assign responsibility to accomplish a task. L use influence to motivate and involve the team. C controlling these processes by monitoring activities and make corrections. We accomplish these resources with our human capital via physicality and knowledge. Planning. Importance of planning. Gives direction to a team. Promotes cooperation between team members. Forces team members to look to the future. Helps with the acceptance of new technology. Allows team members to deal with difficult situations. Examples of safety planning. Planning for HIRA. Incident investigations. Risk assessments. Culture surveys. New projects. Changes. Examples of safety planning. Guidelines. Objectives. Values. Systems. Procedures. Risk profiles. Planning. Good planning. Predetermines future. Specifies actions to achieve objectives. Establish relationships between present activities to achieve desired future objectives. Bad planning. Has a negative impact on team. Encourages excuses, I do not have enough time. Often sets a too high target, cannot be achieved. Goal setting. It describes the desired end result that must be achieved and forms the foundation of planning. Forecasts. A prediction or projection of what conditions will be like in the future, using information about the present, as well as the past. Scheduling and monitor. Monitoring of sequential activities against time frames like action plans. Gantt charts. Visual performance measures. Budgets. Comparison between income and cost. Future allocation and utilization of resources over a specific period. Tool for quantification of future plans. Control mechanism. Determination of performance standards compared with actual performance. Process of planning. Firstly, identify the activity that requires planning. Secondly, set safety goals. Thirdly, formulate action plan to achieve goals. From here, determine actions to achieve goals. Budget for a safety plan. Priorities actions, for example what comes first or have the quickest impact, and from here we schedule the actions, who, What and when? Benefits of organizing. You manage your time effectively. Projects are completed in time. Resources are utilized effectively. Activities are prioritized. Activities are scheduled. Meetings are well organized. Team roles and responsibilities are clear. The process of organizing. First, we assign roles and responsibilities. Secondly, we set standards and determine measurements, and thirdly, we allocate resources and communicate. Set standards of responsibility, assign responsibilities. A supervisor needs to feel comfortable to assign tasks, resources, and responsibilities to team members based on their skills. Equally, this applies to safety in the workplace. It also covers performing tasks safely. Set standards of performance and measure. Standards are the processes and procedures that your team will use to complete their work. Expectations establish the amount of work or the targets that should be achieved. A performance standard refers to an ongoing performance criterion that must be met time and again. It is a projection of expected or planned performance. When you want to set standards, it is a good idea to involve your team members. This will ensure commitment to the standards. Setting standards means communicating to the team members the safety, quality, delivery, cost effectiveness, and morale expected. It is a good idea to keep a team scorecard that can be displayed. Allocate resources and communicate. The following resources should be allocated. The budget should be divided according to the needs. Additional human resources should be allocated if necessary. Equipment and machines should be allocated to enable employees to do their job. Information should be provided where needed, for example, health and safety regulations. Organizing principles. Priorities and schedule tasks, as per planning process. Assign roles and responsibilities, delegate. Set standards and determine measurements. Allocate resources and communicate. Delegation. Decide which task to delegate. Decide who to delegate it to. Provide sufficient resources to execute delegated task. Delegate task. Be prepared to step in, if necessary. Establish a feedback system. Advantages of delegation. Encourages team members to accept accountability. Speeds up the decision-making process. Managers are available to accept more responsibility from high management levels. Disadvantages of delegation. Authority and responsibility not clearly defined. Team members not made accountable for delegated task. Team members may not have a good understanding if no, or poor job description, exists. Example. Organizing the office. Leadership is the process of directing the behavior of others towards the achievement of the company's goal, or team objectives. It is the activity that charges the team with energy, to activate the team members and resources, to get things moving and keep them moving. Leadership versus management. Leadership is innovative, focuses on people, inspires trust, takes a long-range perspective, asks what and why, originates, does the right thing. Management is administered, focuses on systems, relies on control, takes a short-range view, asks how and when, imitates, does things right. How can we maintain control, or regain it, when something goes wrong? Task observations. Planned inspections. Hazard identification, risk assessment, and control. Training. Maintain policies and procedures. Incident investigation. Job hazard analysis. Observations. Revise policies and procedures. Monitoring and controlling activities. Control is a regulatory task that is aimed at determining whether there has been a deviation in the plan so that steps can be taken to rectify and prevent errors. Resource description. Human resources. Control of human resources involves orderly selection and placement of personnel, control over training and personnel development, performance management, financial resources. Control over financial resources involves accurate budgeting, control over expenditure. Areas of control continue. Resource. Physical resources, raw material. Description. An organization's physical resources includes assets like buildings, equipment, furniture, vehicles, machinery and equipment, raw materials, work in process and finished products. Various control systems of an administrative nature can be implemented to control these resources. Control systems for these resources involves usage procedures, for example standard operation procedures, inspections, inventory control, quality controls, and safety controls. Resource. Knowledge or information resources. Description. The control of knowledge or information resources involves accurate forecasting and accurate reporting. Controls to achieve goals. Resources. Performance metric, KPIs. Description. Monitoring and control systems should be in place to track the following. Resources. Safety. Description. Safety or injury-free days, safety audit results, near misses. Job safety observations, closure of audit actions, and incidents. Resources. Quality. Description. Rework, defects, yield or abnormality rate, work accuracy. Process audits, and standards deviation. Resources. Delivery. Description. On-time delivery, production throughput, lead time, response time, and sales volume of turnover. Resources. Cost effectiveness. Description. Efficiency, cost per unit. Overtime, fuel efficiency, power usage, kilowatt hour, over kilovolt ampere, and scrap. Resources. People and or morale. Description. Number of implemented suggestions, perception surveys, attendance, or absenteeism, absent without permissions and sick leave, conformance to training plan, and timekeeping. Control process. 1. Establish standards performance. 2. Measure actual performance. 3. Evaluate deviations. 4. Take corrective actions. Content of site manager or supervisor legal appointment. Regulations. Code of practices, standards and procedures. You as contract supervisor will observe and enforce any codes of practice, any instructions, procedures, directive, permissions, exemptions issued by Nkwe, the Department of Mineral Resources or any other person who is authorized to do so. Any further clarification regarding the interpretation of the Mines Health and Safety Act, and regulations, codes of practice, instructions, directions, permissions, exemptions will be supplied to you by your contract site manager, or contract owner, that is the person you will report to on a daily basis. These standards, procedures, and code of practice is available on the Nkwe Platinum. Contract owner. Safety Department. By using the Nkwe Platinum Code of Practice, you will be guided to the correct standards and task procedures to perform a specific task as per guidelines from the Department of Mineral Resources for open cast mines. Mandatory Code of Practice on the Mitigation and Management of COVID-19 Outbreak. Mandatory Code of Practice for Risk-Based Fatigue Management at Mines. Mandatory Code of Practice on the minimum standards of fitness to perform work on a mine. Mandatory Code of Practice for an occupational health program, occupational hygiene and medical surveillance, on personal exposure to airborne pollutants. Mandatory Code of Practice for an occupational health program, occupational hygiene and medical surveillance, on thermal stress. Mandatory Code of Practice for an occupational health program, occupational hygiene and medical surveillance. Noise-induced hearing loss and silicosis prevention audit tools for use in the South African mining industry. Mandatory Code of Practice for the safe use of conveyor belt installations for the transportation of mineral, material, or personnel. Mandatory Code of Practice for management of working in confined spaces in mines. Mandatory Code of Practice for combat rockfall and slope instability related accidents in surface mines. Fall of ground. Mandatory Code of Practice for emergency preparedness and response. Mandatory Code of Practice for the design, development, construction, safe operation, and maintenance of draw points, tipping points, rock passes and box fronts. Mandatory Code of Practice for Occupational Health Program for Noise. Mandatory Code of Practice for the Prevention of Fires at Mines. Mandatory Code of Practice for Right to Refuse Dangerous Work and Leave Dangerous Working Place. Mandatory Code of Practice for Trackless Mobile Machines. Many thanks. Nkwe Team.